Does your syllabus set your students up for success or stress? This is the big question that we're going to tackle today, and we're diving into how setting realistic time expectations in your syllabus can make a huge difference in your students' experience. I'm Nick. I'm an associate professor of elementary literacy education here at UNL.
And I'm Guy Trainin, a full professor here at UNL, and this is Not That Kind of Doctor.
Today, we're going to break down some practical strategies to help you think about how time estimates in your syllabus makes it into not just a list of assignments, but a genuine tool to really support student learning and balance.
So let's jump in and see how a few changes can really have an impact on the experience our students have and we have teaching our classes.
Let's go. Okay, so Guy, talk to me a little bit about how setting some realistic time estimates matter for students, and how do you think that impacts student experience?
So I think that many of us have noticed, especially since the pandemic, but even before, that our students are really stressed, maybe even anxious. And so they need a little bit of support and a lot of help from us, just setting boundaries, but also realizing what is expected. And I think they come to college and we expect them to know what does the syllabus mean and how to go through a syllabus and infer how much work is going to come their way. But what I've learned over 23 years of doing this, or actually more probably, is that it's actually really hard and that their experience is very different depending on what subjects they're taking, who's the professor. And so they actually often don't have tools to evaluate what's going on. And this is one of the ways to reduce unnecessary anxiety. I always talk to my students and I say there are two kinds of anxiety in the classroom. One is the unnecessary anxiety. Anything about planning, anything that you're just worried because you don't know what's coming, that's unnecessary anxiety. I want you to have the anxiety of, am I doing everything I'm supposed to do to learn everything I'm supposed to learn in your classes? And we both teach a similar class, for example, about teaching elementary teachers how to teach reading and writing. So I think we both share the ideas. I want you to have the anxiety, can I teach kids how to read?
Right.
That's the anxiety I want you to have, not what do I have to do next week and do I have enough time? And the other things we've learned about our students is students are much more likely to have multiple commitments, classes, practicum, volunteer work. And so they need help in making decisions, and they need to understand what we're actually asking them to do.
Right, and they need to, there's an assumption of class time is the only time,
yes,
right? But there's also this notion of time on task that's embedded in something called the Carnegie Hour. That is essentially for every hour you spend in class, you're spending 2 hours outside of class planning for things. That's why 12 credits is considered a full-time load, because you're really spending 36 hours total doing that work. And because students do have a really large amount of other things pulling at their time, laying out the time on task, laying out the kinds of things that we're asking them to spend time on is really important, because one of the things that we know about us as humans, research backs this up, we think things are going to take less time than they actually do.
We're hopelessly optimistic about time.
Hopelessly optimistic when we're planning for time. And so this is one of those reasons why providing students with some kind of sense of how long they should be spending on something, reading, an assignment, whatever, is really helpful for helping them think through, okay, in my schedule, this is the time I need to devote. Here's what I'm doing. It also from an instructor standpoint, keeps us from assigning
Yeah, too much.
too much work. Like it forces instructors, professors who are all convinced that this is the most important thing. Okay, but what's most important about that most important thing? Because you only have this many hours. I always
Yeah.
tell my students, I am not going to ask of you anything more than what I am entitled to because you're paying me to teach you this class, right? Like you're paying me to teach these things. This is the time that you're telling me that you're giving me. This is how I'm structuring it the way I'm structuring it.
And the really important thing, and this is why we tie it to the syllabus, is the syllabus is the planning document. It's also almost always the first document we share with our students. So it's about setting our students on a path to success by putting it in front of them early on and say, this is what we're expecting. This is how much time it's going to take. And I have carefully, we're sending the message, I have carefully thought about this. And I'm not asking you, back to your point, I'm not asking you to do more than is reasonable. I'm not asking you to read 17 books every week. I can, I'm not going to because it is unreasonable. And if you do actually the math of how much work that is, then you have to come to the conclusion that we have to think about the work we're doing in setting those boundaries, again, for our students. Here's what we want you to do, but also for ourselves. Here's what's reasonable to expect. And if we ask them to do more than that, then they're probably going to have to take some shortcuts. And we know some students don't read, and they feel that's too much. And we know some students do assignments late. We know some students don't follow up on certain things they're supposed to be doing. And the goal is to set expectations and then let them go at it. So how do you do that?
How do you do that? Right. So there's a couple of things that I've done for several years. And one of them is I put in parentheses within my syllabus how long a reading should take, right? We also know that college students tend not to read, or they tend to skim, or again, they think that the reading is going to take less time than it actually does. And so I've gone back, I've dug into what we know about reading comprehension and reading speed, particularly for university students. And at the level at which we're teaching, which is junior year, when you're encountering new content, your reading speed slows down to as low as 150 words per minute. And that's really different from where they are normally, right? That's a nearly 75% decrease from average, because normally they can just zip through something because they're skilled readers. But when you're encountering new content, you slow down quite a bit. So I've gone through, created an average of how many words are within each piece that I have students read, and then I divide it by that 150 words per minute. And that's the timing that I give them.
I have a follow-up discussion after that. So I've learned to do that from you, so thank you.
You're welcome.
And because I've never done it, I have thought very carefully about the reading load, but I've never done it quite as precisely and explicitly. So I love that because it does give boundaries. But the follow-up conversation that I have with my students is know thyself. So some of our students are a little bit slower in reading. They know who they are. They've been in college now a while, so they know this takes me a little bit longer. And I say, know thyself, and then make a plan about how, if it takes you a little bit longer than everybody else, how are you going to tackle that? How are you going to make a little bit more time so you can get through all of that? And whatever strategies you have to be in place so that happens. So that's a good conversation to have early. For us also, I think it's a really good way to model how to work with a group of students that have variability in their ability to do something specific, which doesn't reflect in any way on their ability to do anything else. But it is something that needs to be considered and be aware of.
Yeah, well, and that 150 words per minute really is like the typical reading speed of a third grader, right? So when I'm thinking about adaptability, I'm trying to aim for that. This is the most time it should take you to read this article. I'm trying to plan for the very most that's there. And so students can find, based upon their differing abilities as a reader, space within that. It might take them shorter.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that it won't take them much longer, but I'm trying to aim for what that number is.
Yeah.
And I'm clear about that in the upfront. The other thing that this allows me to do is highlights for students. I can kind of give them an idea of the flow of the class. Like, these are the weeks where, and I literally on my syllabus have I teach a 6 credit class. So that's really 5 hours in class, 10 hours outside of class. Here's how I want you to break this down. Here's the time you're in class. Here's the time you're reading. Here's the time I want you spending on group work. Here's the time I want you. So it allows us to it allows students to have a sense of what are going to be high effort weeks and collaboration weeks, and gives them a way to begin planning into that future space, right? And give up some of that executive functioning that they have to sometimes attend to, because I've already laid out some of that.
Yeah, and to piggyback a little bit on that, so one way is to talk about how long does a reading take, but the other one is to think about how long do we expect them to work on a specific assignment?
Yes.
And that's really, really important. The thing that I've learned to do over the years is to really try to put potentially smaller pieces that support a bigger piece, if there are bigger pieces. So divide the work into, let's do this in this week, and kind of even it out a little bit. And that helps make that a little bit more even. But there are weeks when there are bigger assignments. And the most important thing is to space things out so you're not coming to the end of the semester and suddenly there are 4 or 5 big assignments all due, because, and this is to protect the sanity of our students, also to protect our own sanity. It just creates a tremendous load on us as the people who have to read. As I always say to the students, you're writing just one of these papers, I'm reading 30 of them. That feels very, very different in some ways. And so you're also protecting yourselves. But the second piece is remembering that, unfortunately, many instructors across the universities tend to have end-heavy assignments. So it's a summative kind of thing where the big paper or a final or whatever it is that requires a lot of effort at the end. So if you're doing that to them, they are less likely to be successful and more likely to be stressed. So I always think about, are there things that can happen earlier? Obviously, if there's a capstone experience, it kind of has to be towards the end. But if other things don't have to be there, put them earlier on. It'll help our students become successful and us not go crazy at the end of the semester.
Well, and when I talk about this kind of stuff with other instructors, sometimes what I'll hear from them is, oh, this feels really inflexible. This feels like you're micromanaging.
Yeah. But
what I'm really trying to do is lay out the ground rules so I can understand where I can do some flexibility in order to make this more manageable. Like, I'm trying, when you're doing something like this, you're trying to package it differently for students, right? And so when we're thinking about being manageable, there are certain kinds of flexibility that we can engage in, right? You were talking about, if you are doing these kind of capstone things, how can you build that in across the semester, across the last half of the semester? So there are these check-ins that happen and that assignment's kind of cumulative.
Yes.
Right? Instead of boom, it's all at the end. What if you build it up as you move through the semester? That in itself is a form of flexibility, right?
Yeah.
And then things happen, like life happens. And so thinking about, like, instead of due dates, like due weeks, right? You're gonna have those students who get it in the first day that assignment is due, and then, you know, there's 7 days. You got some flexibility in there in order to get that in without, penalization or
Yeah.
needing to talk to me. By the end of that, if it's not in, then we maybe need to have a conversation.
And for me, in conversations with students, what I love about this idea of a soft zone, like a week where this is due this week, I will take it from here to here. The advantage there, I think, is that it is flexible for students because they know some of our students work hard during the weekend.
Right.
And so for them, the fact that you made it due on Sunday and night is really unhelpful because Saturday and Sunday, they're working full time and they really don't have the bandwidth, while others are working during the week or they're busy during the week and the weekend is the golden time. So putting these kind of confidence intervals, to borrow from another place, and say, this is when we need it, and you can plan based on the way you know yourself. Don't put yourself in a bind. Don't wait till the last minute. But if the weekend is your jam, do it during the weekend if it's not. So we're helping them create that better practice where they can start being planful. And if we do it throughout the syllabus and not just towards the end. So I think we both have courses where there are a lot of assignments throughout, also in a 6-credit class, that's more likely, instead of just a midterm and a final, because that helps students spread and be able to get that feedback. Going back to the reasons you want to do that plan is support the students, also support yourself, and make sure that they actually get feedback on the way. Because if all of the assignments are at the end, by the time they get the feedback, they're out of your class. They can't fix anything, and they actually stop caring in many ways because they're like, well, that class is over. I got the grade I got, and there's not much I can do with it, right? With feedback, no matter where it goes. So spreading it and providing that flexibility within is really amazing, I think.
Well, and I think weekends are kind of a sticky wicket, right?
Yeah.
I try to make sure that I schedule things not on weekends.
Yeah.
Right? Just like I don't check email on weekends. I work Monday through Friday. This is how this works.
Yeah.
I assume the same thing about my students, right? So I try to set a due date. I like to go a Wednesday to a Tuesday.
So it includes the weekend without specifically indicating that the weekend is it.
Yes, it includes the weekend if they choose to use their weekend in that way. I don't want to convey this expectation that, oh, you're going to use this weekend to get your assignment done. Nope, you can choose Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, take your weekend off, and then you still have Monday and Tuesday to get stuff into me. Like that's something that I want them to be thoughtful with.
Yeah.
Right? Because just as I'm trying to respect their time, I want to respect my time as well. It's this really interesting dance around how all of that goes.
So what are some ways that you can help students see the bigger picture on time investment?
So I think one of the really helpful things is it allows you to make connections to your learning objectives within your course. And this idea that no one learning objective is ever achieved in just a class. It's going to take an accumulation of experiences, and there's going to be some failures along the way, and thinking through and about how we can engage in that time together, right? So it very much sets up some pretty realistic expectations around you can approach this course as a checklist, or you can approach this course as something that's trying to teach you something.
Yeah.
And teaching takes time. Learning takes time. Here's how much time I am going to say that you need to do this as someone who's done this before.
Yeah.
And one of the tricks around teacher education I find is our students have been students before. They have very large opinions on like, well, this is what's valuable in education, this is what's not. And so it's interesting when they think they know something,
Yes.
and then when they realize that they don't, and how you then have to like go back and reteach and rethink that with them to like scaffold that bit of learning that
Mhm.
and so building that into kind of how you're thinking about that time, I find it really helps students see what they're getting within their course, right? One of the big things that we're always wrestling with in higher ed is what is the value of a class? What is
Yeah.
the value of a degree? And I think that makes it really, really clear how that all works for students.
Yeah, and so there's the clarifying. I spend some time with my students talking through, for example, reading assignments and clarifying that there are some readings we're going to discuss in class, but not everything that we assign gets discussed, because some things, if you read them and I get no questions, I'm moving on as if you understood. It is going to show up in assignments, it is going to show up in other places, but I expect you to read this, because I found very many times that if I go over all of the reading in class, first of all, there's not enough time. And the second thing is that just encourages students to not bother reading, because if you're going to just give us the highlights and everything that we quote unquote need to know, which is never enough, then what's the point? And I've had students that actually did not buy the book, which is a challenge. Right now I'm working with open educational resources, so they don't have to buy the book, but they cannot access the materials it's just as easy. And so those are the things that are on my mind. And I think that writing the minutes or the time on the syllabus is a great start. There's also the ability to use some graphics to just talk about how many hours will be in a specific week for reading, and then how many hours or how many minutes for the assignments. So they have something visual that goes with them. And what I love about that is it helps them to go back to the syllabus, which is a really important indicator. We did a study a few years ago to see when students are using their materials online, what are some indicators of being successful? And one of the indicators of being successful, actually the strongest signal, is how many times people look at the syllabus digitally. It is where everything is.
Which is interesting, because as things are moving onto Canvas or your LMS, sometimes there's this tension, right, between how Canvas represents time and how a syllabus can represent time. I've run into a little bit of that this semester.
Oh, how so?
So one of the things that I do, and I'll send a screenshot so we can get this in the video, is I do break down those 15 hours visually using color coding around here's how I'm thinking you're going to be using your time. And then the other thing that I do is lay out, here's some considerations you might want to be thinking about this week. Here's stuff that's coming up. Here's concepts you're going to come back to. Here are some ways for you to like solidify your learning.
Yeah.
Are you working on your flashcard deck, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of poking and prodding them in some ways to engage in learning experiences that are useful to them. And sometimes, because I haven't necessarily figured out how to get that into the parts of Canvas students pay attention to. Like, it's in my syllabus, it's in my schedule, and that's linked in Canvas. Like, it's all there, but it's the to-do list. It's that check mark.
Yes.
And so it's a slightly different frame of mind. And I've had a couple of students this semester go, I looked at the schedule and that makes sense. But I get caught up in checking stuff off, so I think that's a next kind of step in terms of thinking through how to support students in this work. Because they are trying to make the most of their time, but I don't know that it's making the most of the learning experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the challenge of an LMS, and this is where us manipulating the LMS to serve our students what they need, is to remember that, and I have right now two undergraduates at home who are taking classes, and I can see that they go to the LMS and they say, what is due this week? And that's what guides their primary behavior. They're not going to the syllabus necessarily, or they do when they're not sure, or they want to predict into the future. But for this week, they're just, what's next? And that presents that checklist mentality. So how do we embed that in the assignments so it is clear to them what we're expecting and how? One of the ways I support this is I actually start every class with a few minutes of a check-in on assignments, just reminding them what's coming up, showing them the expectations for this week, especially if next week there's a big assignment. So if you're working through that checklist, just putting on your mind that there's something coming down the pike. It's not yet due. It doesn't mean you should not be working on it. And that 5 to 6 minutes of answering questions and walking them through it is worth the time.
Yeah, and
as a piece of support.
I've started embedding that in my wrap-up.
Yeah, you do a weekly
at the
wrap-up
end
email.
of end of the class. Like, here's what's coming up, because I know you're not looking at this schedule in the way that I would like you to be looking at this schedule. But for the most part, it does. It helps me. Also, it helps me as an instructor in being really specific about what I'm teaching.
Yeah.
I only have this much time, and I build myself a little bit of wiggle room every so often, but it really helps me be laser focused in on those things that I need students to learn. So I'm trying to think through.
All right. So what are some ways to make the workload feel more manageable for students?
Well, I think that the things that we've touched on in terms of laying out kind of how we're thinking through time use, and then helping them think through how they can adapt that based upon what schedules that they have, right? If we lay out, these are our time expectations for you. You've entrusted us to teach you within this class. Here's how we want you to organize your activity. Then they can adapt that. And that, to me, feels more manageable versus oh, am I supposed to do this week? Am I supposed to do that this week? But it does require us to not only have a sense of what's happening from week to week, but the overall cohesiveness of that semester. How is that working? And so there's, as with anything, some challenges to this for instructors, because it does ask you to think about your syllabus in a slightly different way.
And to think more in advance. You cannot just do a bare bones syllabus and help it come to life throughout the semester. You've got to sit before the semester begins and do some serious thinking if you've never done it, and start laying those pieces in. But it is worth it, because it makes the semester considerably easier. It makes you also consider the load on you, which is really important. I keep going back to this. And if you're also spacing, and we talked about spacing longer assignments in chunks, so students are building towards them. But the other advantage of spacing it like that is you get warning signs for students who are struggling a little bit earlier, and you can have those moments where you ask them to have a conversation with you about progress, because this is not looking well. And sometimes what they need is they need somebody to say, are you planning your time? Have you thought about this? What are you doing with your time? Is this the best choice? Yes, you can pick up another 10 hours of work this week, but there's a price for this.
There's a cost.
Because time is limited. Time is a resource. It is limited if you're choosing to prioritize work, and I understand why. But that means you're not going to be doing well. And if that not doing well means you have to retake this class, then that whole financial decision-making has collapsed on you.
Right. And there's no net neutral decision, right? You have to be okay with making those kinds of decisions. And so laying out time in this way is really helpful I think, for students in making those decisions, both in terms of just the personal affordances that they need to address, as well as what's happening. So, to recap, let's talk about recapping. Building these kinds of time estimates isn't just a nice touch in your syllabus, it's really essential. Time is not infinite, it's finite. And so by planning around time, we're setting up a course that's manageable for both us and our students, supportive, and less stressful overall.
And it starts with the syllabus. We need to craft a syllabus that really lays it out for our students, where we communicate that clearly and we can send them back to it, but also for ourselves as a way to make sure that our semester doesn't go awry either.
And as always, we're here to support you. We've developed a kind of time planning template for your semester that's on Not That Kind of blog over at notthatkindofdoctor.net. So feel free to go over, download it, work with it a little bit, adapt it as you need to. It's meant to be a tool to help you engage in this kind of work in your own local context.
And remember that your syllabus should work for your students and definitely for you. It's a cornerstone of everything that's going to happen. And so let's make this semester one of mindful and intentional course planning.
Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great spring semester.
Thanks for watching Not That Kind of Doctor.
We appreciate you and your time and your dedication to the work that you are trying to do.
So like
and subscribe and watch other videos here.